So the camera is following you, if you want. Yeah.
That's good.
Good. So,
Okay. Wow, this is an interesting experiment. Yeah. I once got a very early, can you hear me? Yeah. I once got a very early flight out of Stockholm and went very early. And we were up in the air and the captain's voice came on, "This is your captain speaking. Thank you so much for joining me this morning." I said the same.
Sorry, Marilyn.
Yes.
Let me check if you're recording. Yes. You're recording? Good.
You
Sorry.
can cut that bit out.
How do I go back now?
So the slides will also be recorded, yes? They are part of the recording mechanism.
yes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so here we are on day 4. And what I'd like to do today is to go through a very large body of knowledge, if you like, or call it that, together with you. So I've tried to condense it into some few points and also to offer some opportunities for us to talk about some of the points that I'm raising as I go along. That's the idea. So what is it? One finger? Yeah. So the question that I was asking myself is, how can the work that we've been doing and are doing in this project, and how can its results be used in general to bring about more sustainable eating habits in Europe? So what I'm doing is I'm building on Intellectual Output 4, the SusCOF workbook, in particular chapters 8 and 9, with a little nod to chapter 1. IO5, the app, and in particular to the program design principles that we discussed with our Turkish colleagues before they began developing the app. There are also some additional materials where you'll find more about a lot of this. And one of them you already have. It's the book called ESD Dialogues, which I brought with me and distributed the other day. The other one is the book that I presented to Rainer, which is the book A Transformative Edge, which is, apart from anything else, very stimulating. You'll find a lot of interesting information there. So that's where today's session is coming from these sources. Yeah? Any questions? Is that clear? Yeah. Yes. Let's see if I can do this. Come on. So I've divided it into 3 main topics. The first topic is the role of community, because we haven't really talked all that much about that. And if you're going to bring about wide-scale behavior change, you need to have it rooted in individual communities. It doesn't happen at a nationwide scale, and it doesn't happen in the individual. It happens in the interplay between those, which takes place most obviously at the community level. So I'm going to talk about the role of community. I'm going to talk about personal behavior change, which is very much what was included in the work we did with our Turkish colleagues ahead of the app. But I'll be revisiting some of that, very little. And I will talk about enabling mechanisms. So we have the community, we have the personal behavior change. What is it that enables those to interplay? So that's what I'll be talking about. And every one of these is in principle a whole workshop, but I know that we have a very advanced audience here, so maybe we'll get something out of it anyway. So also just to remind ourselves that each of the national groups here has chosen a focus as a case study during the week. So one focus is to enable students to grasp the basic principles of food sustainability and behavior change. So developing curriculum to enable students to better understand what this is all about. The second thread that was defined, I'm not sure who is doing that, is to empower the students to adopt more sustainable food habits. So to design a program for that, that was one possible thread. And the third thread was to design a process to engage a community, a local authority, or some other expression of community. Yeah, so that's the one that the Swedish contingent is working on. And that, I think, is the end of this particular session. So now, just the overview. So all I need to do now is to get rid of it. In the meantime, any questions? Does this sound reasonable? Does it sound useful? Yeah? Nobody's asleep yet, and nobody is saying no. So, okay, I'll take that as yes. All right.
Wait. Now we go. See it. You have to go one more back.
All right.
Say.
Isn't technology wonderful?
I love it.
Yeah. Great. So point, yeah, number 2. Let's go to community. Uh-huh.
What's that? There it is.
There it is. Yes.
Thank you, Ona. Love it. Okay.
There we go.
So now we're going to
Presentation.
present.
Right.
Now, are we sure that we are recording?
I don't
still?
think we stopped recording. No.
No, we are recording.
Yeah, we're recording. Yes.
But I have to share the screen with this.
We should be pros at this. Finished.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So here we go. Community. So the importance of place. Why is it important? Because it's so intimately connected with our behavior, with our habits, with our lifestyles. Our places are where we know people. So it's our social community. It's where we influence other people and they influence us most directly. Our places are where we have part of our identity invested, which means that we share, to some extent, a culture. This is my identity. I am a citizen of, I am a resident of Rome. I am a student at the Boku campus. It's a part of our identity. And it's also, place is where we can see and experience the impact of behavior change. If we're looking at the global figures and we start sorting our garbage, we don't see what happens. But if we start sorting our garbage and we look out in the street and we see the difference in the number of bins, we can see that happening, yeah? So it's where we get the most important feedback concerning our own behavior. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about how this is based on the theory of the diffusion of innovations, which has been around for a long time now, since the 1940s, 1950s. The basic idea is that in any given community, around any given topic, there will be a norm, and the norm is this blob in the middle. That's the norm. So if you go to any member of that community and say, what's the norm? For example, if you go to students here and ask them, how do students usually get to and from the university? They will probably say, well, the most usual is by public transport. You know? Some walk, some bike, but mostly they go by public transport. And if anybody says, and if you say any of those things, then you're one of us. You're within this amoeba. Yeah. If you say, well, normally I come in by helicopter, you're out here somewhere. You're not one of us. You're one of them. So the definition of a norm is that if I adhere to the norm, I am one of us. Yeah. And then you might find things start to change. Yeah? But the funny thing is, the norm doesn't shift for a very long time. So we have change happening. How does, the reason we call it the amoeba is how an amoeba moves, as everybody knows is, it has its nucleus and it puts out a bit of itself. And then it puts out a bit more of itself and a bit more of itself, but the nucleus is still where it was. And then it goes, and it's in a new position. Yeah. So it seems to be abrupt, sudden, but actually it's been doing this little putting out a bit, change by change, for quite some time before the switch happens. And that is what this diagram shows, that you've got the norm, that things are happening, things are changing. Some students begin to come on electric scooters, but it's still the norm to come by public transport. Yeah? And then suddenly one day it will be the norm to come by electric scooter, maybe. You know? And everybody will say, well, that was quick. That happened suddenly. But actually it's been taking place sort of under the surface. We had a situation, for example, in Sweden where all of the coffee filters were bleached. They were white, bleached white, which is not very good because you get stuff from the bleach in your coffee. Didn't want that. So gradually, some stores started selling unbleached coffee filters. And then quite suddenly, there were only unbleached coffee filters in the shop, quite suddenly. You know, that's how it felt. Oh, oh, that was quick. No, it wasn't. It took several years, but it was going on, but because the norm was still where it was, the norm was still bleached coffee filters, we didn't pay attention to it. We didn't notice it. So attention is very, very important in this. And this theory has also given rise to a lot of other stuff. So especially this word change agents. I guess we all know that by now. The word change agent has passed into the vocabulary in so many different languages. It comes from this body of theory about diffusion of innovations. So we have innovators out here who are somebody who is designing, for example, electric scooters. And they want to get all the students to commute using electric scooters, but nobody's listening to them because this is such a bizarre idea. Yeah? But then they find a change agent. That is somebody who is one of us. Innovators are by definition not one of us. They're one of them. Yeah. They find a change agent who says, hey, this sounds like a cool idea. And the change agent starts, it's sometimes called the first follower. If you want a really funny video on this, go to YouTube and search on first follower, because there's some really funny videos out there. Some people start adopting it, and this is a segment of the population which is often regarded as being maybe 12 to 15% early adopters. And it seems as though it's not going anywhere. This is the first leg of the amoeba going out, right? 10 to 12% doing something. But then the early majority comes on board, and that's another 40%. So you're up to half. And suddenly the late majority don't want to be left behind. They see something is happening finally, so they join. And even the laggards, people who actually want to go in the opposite direction, find themselves part of this momentum. They are less negative towards electric scooters than they were originally. So this is a picture of how innovation spreads in a given population. So my first question to you was, how does this relate to your experience? You know, does it make sense? Can you think of any examples? I gave the example of the coffee filters. Any other examples?
You can see it in almost every innovation. Look at the e-bikes. Spreading now. Fancy tech guys who buy that stuff. It's mountain bikers. Maybe. majority.
So you see it very often in the market. Yeah? And indeed, marketers use this theory the whole time. They use it to persuade us to change our behavior in ways that benefit them. So if you see a new product on the market, early adopters, they're still looking for early adopters. They say, be part of the beta test, because they will attract the people who are adventurous in this particular area of life. They say, join the beta test. When they've got enough early adopters, they will say, this is well tested. Be ahead of the crowd. We've got it all sorted out now. And you can be the first to sign up. Yeah. And when they've got the early majority, they will say, you want to be left behind? Everybody's doing this. So you can see, if you look at advertising, which segment they are aiming for. Well, very, very often, which segment they are trying to attract. Now, this is quite different from working with psychodynamics and saying, let's find out exactly who is going to buy our product and then target them. What you're doing is you're putting out a message that attracts the people you want to attract. It's kind of the opposite. You don't have to do all of that very careful analysis to find out who your audience is. You actually just put the message out there and let them be attracted by it. Now, an interesting thing about this is that it was used, and it actually developed in the context of agriculture. In the, I think, 1940s, it may be in the 1950s, I'm not sure. American universities had been doing a lot of research on how to improve yields, especially grain yields, but not only. And they couldn't understand why the farmers weren't doing it. So they put in a lot of research, and they used that research to influence the farmers to change their behavior. And this is a very, very important story, because as it happens, the researchers were wrong. So when their research was adopted as praxis, as norm, the whole of the Midwest of America turned into a dust bowl. The soil was eroded, it died, basically. So there is the danger in this research. It works. Whether or not you're right, it works. So what we have asked ourselves, those of us who've been researching into sustainable behavior change for a very long time, doing action research in this, we've asked ourselves, if this works to produce change more or less unconsciously or even unwillingly, could it work to enable and encourage, empower conscious change by people with their feet on the ground, instead of telling and actually manipulating the farmers to do things differently, to work with them on the ground to find out what actually worked. And so that there was for me, there were several really big learnings from learning about this theory, but that the manipulative power of this is so great. And it's what we see. It's why we are living less and less and less sustainably today, because businesses are investing huge amounts of money in manipulating us through this kind of understanding of how things spread in society to do things that are less and less sustainable. Yeah. We've all seen that, I'm sure. We've all seen examples of suddenly advertising, suddenly overtaking all of your good efforts to persuade people to sort their garbage or whatever. You know? Oh, don't worry about sorting your garbage, just chop it up and put it down the drain. You know? Different. I saw that in the United States, for example. They were saying, oh, all this sorting garbage, food waste and stuff. Don't bother with that. Chop it up. You buy our chopper and it just puts it into the sewage. And you can imagine what that does to the sewage system. But that wasn't the problem of the person who was marketing these chopping machines. Yeah. So we need to be cautious with this, because it is a very powerful theory. It's a very powerful body of knowledge. And we need to be sure that we're engaging the right stakeholders in a discussion about it. So we need to use it to enable learning, not to teach. Yeah. And that in general is a good device for where we are now in society, in this extraordinarily complex situation that we have, that we can't assume that anything that we today believe is sustainable or will be more sustainable is actually correct or will be tomorrow. We can't make those assumptions. We can't assume that we can teach our students today and that when they leave university and go out into working life, things will work just the way we taught them, because they won't. I have a friend who is a teacher of architecture. He tells his students, he teaches ecological and sustainable architecture. He tells his students right at the beginning, when you leave here, you will probably need to forget most of what you're learning here, because the world is going to be different. What you really need to take from here is the ability to synthesize what you know and what you see. So it's paying attention, combining knowledge with paying attention to what is actually out there. This is, to me, a very important point. So I took some time on it. Let's have a look and see what else we have here. Okay. When we talk about the change agent and the early adopters, what we need to do is to think about for ourselves, before we start, who are the stakeholders in the system that we are trying to influence? And we did some analysis of this in a previous project. Who are the stakeholders in any given community, the generic stakeholders in the food system? And there are quite a lot of them. We have the producers. In pretty much all communities, there will be somebody who's producing for sale. So commercial producers, farmers, market gardeners, fisherfolk, whoever. There will be the processors from the very simple. So people might be the local baker who is taking the grain, grinding it and making bread, to ultra processing, a huge factory that is producing ultra processed food that is being sent out on the global market. It can be very, but in our community, we will almost certainly have somebody who is a professional food processor. We have the distributors, wholesalers, exporters, importers. We may not have those in our particular community, but they will be represented through, for example, the retailers. The retailers can be shops, markets, online sales, a growing influence in this area. We have the professional kitchens, restaurants, cafeterias, hospitals, prisons, schools, everywhere that food is produced by paid chefs, you could say. We have the local authorities, and the local authority, again, is not one block. It's not, and it's many different departments. And in many countries and many municipalities, they don't actually talk to each other. So sometimes the best thing we can do in a project in a community is to get them talking to each other. For example, the people concerned with health and hygiene, talking to the people concerned with procurement, talking to the people who are concerned with environment and sustainability, maybe even talking to the people who are concerned with education. So they all have their little compartments, and they all have some investment in the food regime in that particular municipality. And of course, wait, there's somebody missing. Come on. Consumers, yeah. Consumers, yeah, it's us. And of course, civil society organizations who represent us. So it might be, there might be a consumers association. For example, in Hungary, we've worked for quite some time with a national association of conscious consumers, which has branches in just about every municipality in Hungary. And so it's very easy for us to go into there and work with their local groups because they're already kind of there. In Vietnam, I've worked a lot with the Communist Party's Women's Union, which has also groups in every municipality, and they are very oriented towards lifestyle and the kind of things that we work with. And if I know if I can get them behind me in a given community, everything will work. It could be the football club. It could be the church or the mosque. It could be many different organizations in any one community who in some sense represent us as consumers and who are concerned about food. And there is a marketing adage that says that if you really want people to take action on something, then you need to get the message to them, the invitation to them 3 times, and preferably from 3 different sources. So if you're sitting in your apartment or your villa and you get a piece of paper through your letterbox that says, hi, the tennis club is holding a raffle because we're doing this event because we want to raise money to support an organic farmer in our community. Oh, that's interesting. And then you get exactly the same message from your church. And then you get the same message from somebody else. And right, I better go to that. So 3 times is a magic, 3 is a magic number. So civil society organizations, many of them have an interest in food that you don't even think of. One of the first that I worked with in Sweden on this question was a church in quite a small parish, and they had decided that their parishioners wanted organic food, but it was too difficult to get. The farmers were out there and they were not in the shops. So they took orders in the church. They brought all the potatoes and so on into the church basement, and the parishioners came once a week and they divided them all up. Yeah? That was one of my first encounters with organized purchase of organic food in Sweden. It was maybe 25 years ago. So you never know where your allies are going to be until you start checking who's out there. So first you find your change agents, your early adopters. You look around and see who's doing what, who's sending the kind of message that resonates with what we want to do, like that particular church or that particular tennis club. What you need to do then is to craft messages for them. So very often what we do when we want to change behavior, we say, you should change your behavior because we have done a lot of research and we've found out this is best for the planet and it's probably better for you as well. So, do it. Yeah. What we found was, have you ever heard this? People don't care. Have you heard that? People don't care. What we found was just about everybody cares about something. The question is, do they care about the same things I care about? Or can I make them see a connection between what they care about and what I care about? So we did some research on this and we were not alone. It's been done in quite a few countries and found that what people in general care about is not actually money unless they're starving. It's not many of the things you might think, and it's not necessarily the environment. That's a very small minority that really passionately care about animals or forests or whatever. They do, but they're not so many. But what everybody cares about is their community and a future for their kids or their brothers or sisters' kids or their grandchildren, whatever. So it's the caring is at the level of relations and future. And if we can make that connection in our message about food and sustainability, then we will get the attention of a lot of people. So this is the way to build a better future for your community, for your children, is an almost irresistible invitation for a very large number of people. So what we're doing is we're looking for the messages that will attract the people who are maybe going around thinking, one should do something, not I should do something, one should do something, something should be done, and getting their attention. So I have some suggestions for the national groups when we convene after this session. The focus one is, which is focusing on knowledge transfer to students, to design a course module based on social diffusion theory. How might you do that? So it's an invitation. You might like to think about it. If you are working on focus 2, getting the students to change their behavior, then think about the campus as a community and see if you can identify on your campus some innovators, some early adopters, and maybe some other stakeholders that you hadn't thought of before. Just brainstorm around it and see what you come up with. And focus 3 is something that we haven't started on yet. This is our focus. I think we should draft a project proposal to test the viability of a behavior change campaign in one specific community. So I've done this a lot with businesses. We conducted surveys to find out, is this organization, are the employees in this organization ready for the kind of change that the management would like to introduce? Are they ready for the change? We could do that at the level of a community. So I think we should address that this afternoon. Okay, that's the end of this section. So now we need to move on to the next section. In the meantime, any questions or comments? I'm aware that this is a very fast run through of a very complex subject. So I'm prepared. Either it was very clear, which is almost impossible with something of this complexity, or it was very unclear, if you don't have any questions or comments. It was clear, huh? Okay. Well, I hope it was clear to the point of inspiring you to look further into it, because there's a lot more to be said about this, but it's fascinating once you get started. Ah, look at this. Very good. So this next subset is about intended to be about behavior change of the individuals at the individual level, which is really what we're talking about with the app. We're talking about change at the individual level. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about information and nudging. I'd talk a bit about how we can move from a linear model of behavior change to a circular model, or even finally a spiral model. I'll mention the intervention points that we have if we're working with a spiral model. And finally, I would just say something about the role of this in the context of international movements like education for sustainable development, climate, and the SDGs. I'll just use that at the end. So this is what I'd like to go into here. And you'll find quite a bit about this in the book in chapter 9, I think. Okay, information and nudging. There are two very common models for behavior change. One is to inform or educate people until they make the right decisions. So if they're not doing it right, it must be because we haven't told them often enough or well enough. We haven't explained it clearly enough. So let's keep informing, let's keep educating, and sooner or later, everybody will do the right thing. And nudging as a concept came about partly because everybody began to realize that that doesn't actually work. Partly because there are too many forces pulling in other directions. We are not the only ones on the market with information to sell and education to sell. There is everybody else out there with other products to sell, which might be pulling them in the opposite direction. So it counteracts everything that we do. If the first method, the information and education, had been adequate, then nobody would have been smoking tobacco after 1981, approximately. Nobody in the world, because the amount of information out there was absolutely overwhelming. It took legislation, which is a part of nudging, actually. So nudging, we can nudge people into doing the right things, either consciously or unconsciously. So we put a huge tax on tobacco, for example, and so fewer people can afford cigarettes. The rich get away with it, but the poor generally smoke less. Or we can offer them incentives. We can offer them tax breaks, or we can offer them free gifts if they do the right thing, what we think is the right thing. So that's what nudging is about. And generally, nudging is about doing something consistently over a very long period of time. And it's very high intensive, maybe not at the beginning, but you really need to keep at it. You can't let up ever. So if you take legislation, for example, legislation about smoking in public places, you can pass a law if you like, but you can't actually impose the law unless a majority, or maybe that's the wrong word, but a large section of the population agree with it. So I've seen laws that have been passed, and 10 years later, absolutely nothing has happened. Everybody, including government agencies, are simply ignoring the law because nobody believes it. Nobody believes it was well-founded. So there's always this interplay between opinion and the mechanisms used for nudging. And spontaneous change can result from external events, of course. I mean, you, for example, did anybody here change your food consumption patterns as a result of COVID? I know I did. I ordered more online because I didn't want to go down to the store. In fact, couldn't for a while. Anybody? Did anything change in your behavior as a result of COVID, directly or indirectly? I'm going to invite you to talk to each other about that, and also to talk about these others, about the role of carrots and sticks, so nudges. And also your experience of the sustainability of new food behaviors that result from events or from information or from nudging. So just to think about your own experience and talk in twos or threes about that. And we'll hear what you have to say in a little while. Have fun. Right, very good. So the point of these questions is not to tell you what is right or wrong. The point of these questions is that we all need to pay greater attention to what is influencing our own decisions, our own choices. Because if we pay attention to those, and if we understand what is driving us to change our behavior, then we will be better able to work with other people. So paying attention is a very important part of the work of working with behavior change. In fact, I've said you could actually summarize the whole theory of behavior change into two words: attention and intention. But that's another matter for another course. So if we look at the linear model of behavior change, it says we have information, we give it to people. They, by some magically human process, which is amazing, transform it into knowledge. So the information becomes knowledge. This influences our attitudes or our values, which in turn leads us to take action to change whatever needs changing. Yeah? I'm sure this sounds familiar. We've all seen it, also in educational contexts. It drives a lot of the change processes that we see around us in society. The problem is, it doesn't work. It truly doesn't work. Again, if it really worked, then things would look very, very different. Because the information is out there, we're pushing it out, et cetera, but where's the action? What happens at the other end? So what we're trying to do is to look for a way to turn this into a circle or even a spiral. And in between, before that, one of the basic flaws of this model is it misses on understanding. Between knowledge and attitude or values comes something called understanding, which is quite different from knowledge. It's quite interesting, but you can actually feel it when something, you can, in your body even, when a piece of knowledge becomes understanding. In fact, one researcher has put it, knowledge leads to debate, understanding leads to action. So whatever body of knowledge we propose, somebody will always say, ah, but, yes, but, yes, but. And then there is another body of knowledge, yeah, but so-and-so says, and maybe there isn't a climate change going on at all, and, you know, yes, but. So knowledge always leads to debate, which is as it should be. I mean, the debate is important, but it doesn't lead to action. And if we are interested in bringing about action, we need to take into account that little step, which is understanding. So what we've done is we've created this other model, which actually contains the same elements, but they are rearranged. So information is not called informing. It doesn't come from outside. It's called finding out. Yeah. So to find out something is incredibly important and empowering. Values and attitudes, we've translated into caring. As I said, everybody cares about something. So we need to start from, I care about something, you care about something, what can we do together? Where are our points of common interest? And the interesting thing is we here have 6 intervention points. In the linear model, we have only one intervention point, which is we inform, we inform, we inform. Yeah. Here we have 6 intervention points. We can intervene, and one of the most powerful points to intervene is here at action, which in the former model would be the wrong end of the scale. It's the result, it's not where you start. But in fact, one of the most empowering things you can do is to invite someone to take action, especially experimental action. So you don't say, you should be traveling by public transport. You say, I challenge you to find out which buses go between your home and the university and to ride the buses for 1 week. And then tell me how it went. Yeah, so it's a challenge in a way. An invitation to experiment is a kind of challenge. And there are some lovely examples of this. You might have even come across them yourself. It is one of the most powerful ways to bring about action because, why? If I believe that nothing I do makes a difference, if I believe that no meaningful action is possible, then I don't take in the information. The information is all there, but what is stopping me from taking it in is not that I'm stupid. It is that I don't believe I can do anything about it. And if that is my belief, really deep down, then it's too painful. You know, the world's coming to an end. No, I don't want to know that. You know. So we block off all information about things that we seriously believe we can't influence. The exception is, of course, what is sometimes known in English as Job's comforter. Do you know that expression? Job in the Bible was somebody, well, never mind. Job's comforter is somebody who tells you the world's going to end. You know, we're all going to hell, nothing works, everything's bad. You know, everybody knows people like that, right? What they're doing is they're taking it in through their ears or their eyes and spouting it out through their mouths to get rid of it. It is not actually passing either their brain or their heart. Yeah? They're just a conduit for all this bad news. So they're not taking action either, because it would be meaningless, because everything's going to hell anyway. Right? So what we have here are actually 6 intervention points. I've said here, we can invite people to take experimental action. We can also show them that we care about them and about what they care about. Very important. We can help them to formulate questions, because when I start to care more about something, I have questions. When I allow myself to care a little bit more, I have questions. We can help them to formulate their questions. We can help them to find out the answers. We can help them, once they found out the answers, to formulate their intention. And here comes that very important word again. It's extremely important in psychological theory also, intention, extremely important. And once they've formulated the intention, they will probably take action. We might be able to help them there too, but we can also give them feedback or help them to find or assess the impact of what they have done, the action they've taken. So suddenly we have 6 possible intervention points where we can support people, empower them to take action. So it's a very different situation to the one where we are helpless. We can only give them information and hope they will do the right thing. Right? Does that make sense? Ryan is looking very skeptical here. That's fine. What would you like to say?
I don't know. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But the linear model also would make sense, but only on a specific condition.
Go on.
Or I think at the beginning, there should be the question, what is the pain?
No pain, no gain.
What is the need? Yeah.
Okay.
I believe when people pay, yeah, then they are open for information.
Okay.
You
So,
know what I mean?
so
If you feel pain that I don't know. Let's say you get cancer, look at that. But somebody gets cancer, that's a pain which makes him look up information. Maybe should I change the way how I eat?
So, yeah, so you're taking me somewhere which is very exciting, which I haven't intended to include today. But it is a theory of change, which is very powerful. And it says that change, actually, even the actions here, is not something you plan. It's something that happens when the conditions are right. Yeah? So it's coming back to what you said. And the right conditions are when there is a reasonable balance between dissatisfaction and hope. So if I have a huge pain, a lot of dissatisfaction, and no hope, then I have no energy to make a change. If I have a huge hope and no dissatisfaction, I have no reason to make a change. And it's the balance between those two. And very often in our society, what we lack today is the hope side. We are, because, well, for many reasons, but one reason is that both media and to some extent politicians have an investment in keeping us afraid and dissatisfied. Yeah. Elif.
Why do we fresh vegetables or sustainable food or a healthy food? I eat. Yeah. For example, where the starts firstly, every day I try to eat fresh vegetables and then healthy, but then so
Yeah.
we are going to die.
Yeah, right.
So
Yes.
I start to eat everything and drink every day for the 1 year. Yeah.
Yes.
The time go and then stop. In the past, appear and data
Yes.
Yeah, you're right. When man is feels or they're pessimist and they stop
Yes.
in hope.
Yeah.
But it changes, it depends on their feelings, I think.
Well, yeah, that's good. That's perfect. It's a great illustration. I think we can work with this, and we do work with it a lot. We need in change processes to work with futures, not because we are making forecasts or prognoses, but because every one of us carries a vision of the future inside us, but not one vision. We carry a whole range of futures inside us, and they don't talk to each other. They don't talk to each other. We might have a vision of the future that's very hopeful, but we only allow that out on Sundays, you know. Or we have a vision of the future which is something we expect to happen. So when we work with people with futures, we help them to bring out all of the pictures they have of the future inside them, and to look at them and say, which are hopes, which are fears, which are expectations. Yeah? So it's a refinement of what I said earlier. If my hopes and my expectations are identical, I have no reason to change. All I need to do is wait, and everything will be perfect. Yeah? If my fears and my expectations are identical, I have no energy to make a change, because we're all going to die. Yeah. Yes, right. So this is hugely important, and I hadn't intended to get into it here, but how nice that you brought it up. Shall we just move on a bit? Because, yeah, okay. I had a question here for a buzz. How might you invite people to experiment? So invitation to experiment within this framework of SusCOF. I think we'll leave that for now. We've had a nice discussion here instead. So just going to what are the international movements that are linked to individual behavior change? And one of them is obviously education for sustainable development. Now, education for sustainable development has been interpreted in very many different ways, but one that is very clear to us and to UNESCO and everybody else is it's education for. It's not education about. So education about what's going on out there or anywhere else is not education for sustainable development. Education for sustainable development implies that the education is capable of enabling action on the part of the students, either now or later. So we need to equip our students to take action, either in the present as students or in the future in their professional roles. And as somebody said the other day, every profession is a climate profession. Every job is a climate job. So whatever job we're going to be in, we need to be equipped to see it as a climate job or as a sustainability job, and not just as whatever. And sustainable development, it's not education for sustainability, it's education for sustainable development, which implies an ongoing process of learning plus action, learning plus action. So there's some very central facts about ESD. If we look at climate and look at the relationship to our project, the global food system is the biggest single contributor to climate change. There is no other sector of human endeavor that impacts the climate as much as food, the food regime. And at the same time, it is the branch of human endeavor that is suffering the highest impact from climate change. So we have every reason to focus on food when we're talking about climate. If we look at Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs we've talked about, food is much more than SDG 2, which means zero hunger, or SDG 12, which means sustainable production and consumption. Food actually impacts every single one of the 17 SDGs. And it is, as far as we're concerned in my organization, it is the single most important topic, the single cross-cutting topic of the SDGs. That's why we put so much energy into it and why we were pleased to join this project when we were invited. And just since we're in this setting, the cross-cutting process of the SDGs, which also impacts all of the SDGs, is learning. Education is SDG 4.7, but that's only a very small part of the story. So if we are ever to have a chance of reaching the SDGs, then we need to find new, innovative ways of enabling learning in a complex environment. Something quite different. Okay, that's that about behavior change. You'll be happy to hear that the final slide set, when I get to it, is shorter. In the meantime, any reflections? All reflections are welcome. Right, we're there. Oh,
I'm getting faster.
yeah, great team.
Yeah.
Okay, enabling mechanisms. There's a lot to be said about this. So what I've done is I've picked out a few mechanisms that seem to be particularly powerful in enabling us to make the connection between individual behavior change and community. And the ones I've picked out are focus, continuity, infrastructure, legitimacy, and peer relationships. So we'll just take a quick look at those before we go and get some coffee. So the focus, I mentioned this earlier, the focus is what does your audience care about? We need to say, put in the center of that spiral, the focus of attention is something that enough people care about that our message will be heard. So it doesn't mean compromising our focus or what we care about. It means listening to what other people care about and finding ways in which our focus and theirs are aligned or can be aligned. Now, that is hugely important in any behavior campaign, change, program, whatever. Infrastructure. Now here comes the importance of place. We often talk, we say, well, we have international programs to influence behavior, and we tell people well, you should compost your food waste. Well, it's not allowed in my municipality, or there's no way I can do that, or and so on. So we need to be very aware of the actual infrastructure when we're talking to people. It's no good just saying compost your food waste. We need to talk about the conditions under which food waste can usefully be composted. What happens, things change. For example, we composted our food waste as long as we had a house and garden. And we had a very good composting system going, worked beautifully. And then we moved to an apartment in a different municipality. And they collect food waste. Well, we had no room in the apartment, no space that was suitable for composting, although we could have done a very small quantity. So we looked, is there room to do it in the yard? And then we found this particular municipality, they collect the food waste separately, and they digest it first. So they extract the methane and use it to run local buses. And then having extracted the methane, they produce the compost. So they were doing better than we did in our previous life, because in our previous life, in our compost in the garden, the methane was just released into the air. So you never know, unless you know the place, how the infrastructure is supportive or not supportive of what you want to. So, and also the importance of being open for the potential to bring about improvements. So sometimes there is a kind of acceptance, well, the infrastructure is what it is, and we have to live with that. Yes, we do. We need to work with that, but we don't necessarily need to live with it. We can maybe find ways to improve it. And that brings in the importance of peer relationships, where we can talk to people in our community who know what's going on, and inform about possibilities. Legitimacy. This is quite important. It might be a whole stakeholder group that has legitimacy. For example, I worked in a community in Korea, South Korea, where the Young Buddhist Association had huge legitimacy. Everybody, if they said something, everybody believed it, simply. And so it could be a local business that has, is very well known, very well established, maybe like the restaurant last night. If they were talking about local food, everybody would say, yeah, he knows what he's talking about, yeah, right? There's a legitimacy there, upon us from years of practice or decades of practice, and possibly even generations. I don't know that, but it felt as though that, yeah, there could be generations behind. Might be sports clubs, it might be health workers, there is legitimacy behind what some people say about some things. And we also accord legitimacy in boxes. So if our children's school teacher tells us something, we might believe it up to a certain point, but we won't believe it if we think it's beyond their competence as a school teacher. Yeah. It also varies from country to country. So in Ukraine, where I've done a lot of work, especially with schools, and I've worked with over 5,000 teachers, teachers have high status. If the kids go home and say the teacher says we should sort our garbage, well, that carries a lot of weight. It would not do that in Sweden. In many countries, teachers have quite low status, not very high legitimacy for telling adults what to do. So you need to know your audience, you need to think about. So when you look at the stakeholders in food, in the community you're working in, you need to consider who has legitimacy and who lacks it in regard to the kind of topics that we're talking about. You might consider the roles of the respective roles of legitimacy and infrastructure. For example, when it comes to sorting food waste, probably infrastructure is more important. If you're choosing to eliminate sugar from your diet, then it will be somebody, it won't be an infrastructure question, it will be a legitimacy question. Who is going to back me up and say that, oh yes, you should really reduce the amount of sugar because then you will have so many health benefits, etc., etc. So legitimacy and infrastructure sometimes they have different roles in different behaviors. The peer relationships are incredibly important. And that is peer support, when you think that the people you know and like are going to support you or are supporting you. Peer pressure, when they're putting pressure on you to do something different. And also social media. There's a new thing here. How comfortable would I be going out into Facebook and saying, I've started composting on my balcony? Would that feel like a good thing to say? What do I think I know about my peers? Would they say, yeah, or would they say, ugh? So peer relationships are incredibly important when we decide or decide not to adopt new behaviors. So suggestions for national groups also for this afternoon, if you have any time and energy left over. You could, in Focus 1, design a course module based on behavior change theory and praxis. How would you go about that? What kind of sources would you be looking for? What methods might you use, educational methods, to get the message across? Focus 2, you might think about identifying ways of establishing the legitimacy of your program. When you want students to change their behavior, how do you establish that this is a legitimate thing to do? And Focus 3 would be the similar thing in a given community. Those are examples of questions that we might consider as we move further into this extremely inspiring week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marilyn.